welcome to today's presentation. We're doing it under the ThinkLegal banner. I today have very, how shall I put it? We're very fortunate today to have Stella Coetzee with us. She's going to be talking to us about how to calculate the accrual, and we're going to work through a few practical accrual calculations. Lee, just in terms of housekeeping, if I can ask if you can please just admit people from the lobby as we go on. Folks, please make sure that your mics are muted. I'm not going to do mute all, otherwise I might mute our esteemed speaker today, which might not be ideal for everyone involved. Today we are doing what we've termed lunchtime learning, which is basically going to happen quite a bit more, hopefully, in the coming months. Today we are talking about accruals with Stella, and the whole idea of lunchtime learning is to have very practical 1 hour sessions to have something interesting to do while you have your lunch, and where we really can troubleshoot some of the more problematic ones. The first one is obviously the accrual. We've on our little ThinkLegal group, we've had a lot of people saying that they are having some difficulty with accrual calculations. Hence, I reached out to Stella, and she was very kind to offer her services to help us with a workshop on how to calculate. It's funny how difficult it is to get accountants to do public speaking, Stella, but obviously you are quite brave, but you're not just an accountant, you're also a mediator. So very grateful from my side that you are willing to help us today with this. So folks, we are going to be looking at 3 scenarios. I am going to share my screen with you shortly, and then I will, for all intents and purposes, become a bit of a talking head, because I'm going to mute my camera whilst I have the screen share. I'm working on my MacBook inside, with little one being at home from school today on holidays, so I don't have my big setup. So if you see me disappear and you hear a disembodied voice, do not panic, it is me. So the format of what we're going to do is we're going to do 3 scenarios. The first scenario is going to be a very simple scenario. Scenario 1 is simply going to start with a 0 commencement value, very few exclusions, and we're going to go through it. The second scenario is going to build on scenario 1, and the third scenario will then be not nightmarishly difficult, but we do try and take care of all the different factors. How we're going to run it is in terms of each scenario. I'm going to read out the scenario, then just with reference back to the Act, I'm just going to alert you guys to the pitfalls, and then I will hand over to Stella, who will then take you through how she has done the accrual calculation, and then we'll take it from there. So without further ado, we've got an hour. Let's get into it. Would like to formally now welcome you, Stella. Stella Coetzee, ladies and gentlemen, is a chartered accountant, CASA, and she is also a divorce mediator. She is currently serving on the executive committee of the South African Association of Mediators, SAM, and she is acting as their treasurer at the moment. So I'm very grateful to Stella for making herself available, and we're very fortunate to have her today. So if I can, whilst I get my screen share ready, if I can get some virtual rounds of applause and a warm welcome for Stella, and thank you once again for putting yourself out there to really enrich all of us with your knowledge. Right, so Stella, ready to go?
Perfect. Thank you.
Any last words? Any last words before we chuck you in the deep end?
No. I just want to say thank you very much, Mervyn. You give us these great opportunities to learn from each other, and I'm the privileged one today to be able to share what I know of the subject matter. But thank you, Mervyn, for all your time that you're doing for helping mediators and attorneys to improve ourselves and to give, at the end of the day, better service to our clients.
Excellent. Thank you, Stella, for the kind words. Unfortunately, it's not going to save you from all the difficult questions I've got lined up for you. So flattery will get you nowhere today, but thank you so much. Guys, right. So scenario one is a fairly straightforward one. John and Jill are married, subject to the accrual on 10 May 2005. They stipulate their commencement values as nil in the antenuptial contract. They've also got 0 exclusions. John and Jill get divorced on 18 June 2022, and then we've given you a brief synopsis of the assets in each of their estates. John has a car worth 150K, a house worth 1.5 bar, a home loan of 750,000 Rand, vehicle finance of 80,000, a credit card with an outstanding balance of 12,000 Rand, shares in Naspers worth 1.7, which was bought with the proceeds from the sale of shares in John's Salon Pty Limited, a retirement annuity worth 2.5 bar, a life insurance policy worth 1.5 bar, an inheritance worth 900,000 invested in a money market account. Jill has a car worth 200,000, a house worth 1.1, a home loan of 700,000, vehicle finance of 60,000, a credit card with an outstanding balance of 92,000, retirement annuity worth 1 bar, cash investment of 1 million received in terms of damages due to a back injury, and a cash investment of 800,000, which was donated to her by John. So guys, in this example, we do have 1 or 2 pitfalls, which I'm going to alert you to right off the bat. Firstly, just a big caveat, the retirement annuity, I know if we're being very, very clever, we would say we first have to have it actuarially calculated, and we have to take into account the tax, etc., etc. But for purposes of today, that's not going to be the argument that we're going to follow. We're just going to assume it's worth 2.5 bar for purposes of the accrual. Am I correct, Stella? I hope I'm not talking nonsense.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Then let's quickly talk about the legal framework before we go into the mathematical framework. If you want to calculate the accrual, you would be foolhardy not to do it without a copy of the Matrimonial Property Act next to you. Specifically, guys, make sure that you have Section 4 and Section 5 open next to you. As we know, the accrual of the estate of a spouse, the amount by which the net value of their estate at the dissolution of the marriage exceeds the net value of the estate at the commencement of the marriage. Secondly, guys, be aware, and I'm sure all of you are aware, an accrual is a cash claim. It is not a division of a joint estate. It is a claim in cash, and we see that in terms of Section 3(1) of the Matrimonial Property Act. At the dissolution of a marriage subject to the accrual by divorce or by the death of one or both the spouses estate shows no accrual or a smaller accrual than the estate of the other spouse acquires a claim against the other spouse for an amount equal to half the difference between the accrual of the respective estates. Now, let's quickly talk about our pitfalls in this scenario before we go into the mathematical point of things. Number one, a life insurance policy is a risk policy. That clients will always give you life insurance when you ask them for a list of assets and liabilities. Life insurance we are not going to put in. An inheritance of 900,000 Rand we are not going to put in, and I'll tell you why. Because Section 5 sub 1 says an inheritance, a legacy, or a donation which accrues to a spouse during the marriage, as well as any other asset which they acquired, does not form part of the accrual of the estate unless the parties agree otherwise in the ANC, or if the testator stipulates otherwise. So we're going to accept that this is excluded from the accrual. Then in terms of Jill's estate, we have 2 exclusions over here. And Stella, you've started us off with something very complex, eh? Number 1, the first exclusion is the cash investment of 1 million, which was received in terms of a damages claim due to a back injury. And that is excluded in terms of Section 4(1)(b) Roman numeral 1, any amount which accrued to an estate by way of damages, other than damages for patrimonial loss, is left out of account. And then finally, the cash investment of 800,000 is also going to be excluded, and I'll tell you why. Because Section 5(2) says in the determination of the accrual of a spouse, the estate of a spouse, a donation between spouses, other than a donation mortis causa, is not taken into account as either part of the donor or part of the donee. So those are our exclusions. So over to you, Stella, and I'm sure everyone has now got enough reason to understand that you don't do an accrual claim without your Matrimonial Property Act open next to you. So I'm going to mute my mic now and let's get into it, Stella.
Thank you so much, Mervyn, and welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share a bit of my knowledge, and I really hope that you guys are going to get value out of this session and learn something. Okay, and then please be sure to put all your questions in the chat line, and then we'll address it at a later stage. Okay, so here we go. Scenario 1. I'm going to first, just for your information, the structure of how I'm going to present the solution is I'm first going to give you the overview of the total, what the actual accrual is going to be. And then we'll go into details of this summary of the accrual, how we got to those values. Okay, so on this scenario, so I made an assumption that John is the plaintiff and Jill is the defendant. So you'll see in the first column, the total assets that we've got for John is 6.75 million. Less excluded assets of 900,000 and less his liabilities of 842,000, giving him a total accrual of 5.008 million. If you look on the second column for Jill, the defendant, her assets, total assets, come to 4.1 million. Less her excluded assets of 1.8 million and her liabilities of 852,000 gives her a final accrual of 1.448 million. Okay, so how the calculation works. The combined accrual, the first blue line, you'll see an amount of 6.456. That is, you add the two amounts, the 5 million of John plus the 1.4 million of Jill gives you the 6.4 million. So that's the combined accrual for both of them. Then we need to split 50-50. So each person then gets half of the 6.45. So each party gets 3.228 million rand, hence equal amounts on both sides. Okay, so how do we split this now? So there's an adjustment required. If it's in brackets, it means that person must pay. If it's a positive, it means that person is receiving the money. So John must have an accrual of 3.28 million, but at the moment he's got an accrual of 5 million, hence we deduct 1.7 million off so that he will have an accrual of 3.2. Okay, so it's the 5 million minus the 3.2 gives you then the 1.7 million. And then on the same side for Jill, if we look, she's going to receive 1.7. She's got at the moment 1.4. So then she's going to have at the end of the day 3.28 after John has paid her the 1.7. And there both of them have got an equal split of the total accrual. Okay. Any questions here, or shall we do the questions later on? Mervyn?
I think what we can do, Stella, is let's go through the detailed drill down of the summary that you've got here. And then we can take questions on this. Okay. Sure. And then we take it from there. That's okay. And then we can deal with scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3.
Okay. All right. Okay. So as I said, that is the final accrual calculation. Now we're going to go into the details of the assets and the assets that's excluded. So here we've got the assets, the vehicle, immovable property, which is the house, the shares in Naspers, and the retirement annuity. Then the next section is the assets that's excluded from the joint estate, which is the inheritance of 900,000. And thirdly, we list the liabilities, the home loan, the vehicle finance, and the credit card, which then gives us the 5 million, the net asset value of John. Just something that I want to alert you guys. So if you look at the liabilities, just the tip that I want to give, you know, when you've got, sometimes people would say, okay, I owe on my car, I owe 200,000. They give you the statement of their vehicle finance, but they don't give you the value of the asset as well. One must always make sure that if there's a liability that's attached to an asset, you must account for the asset on the asset side as well. So the vehicle finance, you've got vehicle finance, but you've also got a car with a value attached to it. So that's why we've got the vehicle at the top as a part of the assets. So that's just a tip on that side. Okay, and then if we move on to Jill's assets and liabilities. So Jill, her assets is the vehicle, her house of 1.1 million, her retirement annuity giving us a total value of 2.3, and then the assets that's excluded on Jill's side is the damages that was paid out, the 1 million for her back, and then also the donation that she received from John. Then her liabilities is her home loan, her vehicle finance, and credit card, which give her then a total of 1.4. Mervyn, I think if we can just go back to the summary again. So there we've gone through the details of the assets and the liabilities just to show you where the totals came from. Okay.
Fantastic.
So
Stella, may I clarify something?
Sure.
Just quickly, which I picked up when you were going through. So when we talk about less excluded assets, to get to the total assets over there, the 6.75, you add the excluded asset and then you deduct it again. Yes. So it's not a case of you exclude it and then deduct it. So guys, just be very, very careful. Yeah. The included asset value is 5.85, and then the deduction of the 900 takes place after it was put on top. So another way to do it is to simply discard them completely. You'll get to the same total, just so that there's not confusion. Stella, and if I'm talking nonsense, give me a big clap through the screen, hey?
No, you're absolutely right, Mervyn, but I think coming from the accounting background, for completeness sake, I would prefer to put everything in. And then also, you know, when you do the calculation and you actually put, you know, and you list all the assets and liabilities, and you actually list the excluded assets that on the settlement agreement, you know, then there's no confusion, you know, for party to say, oh, but later on. I think it's very prudent to have everything included as well as what is excluded.
Include what is excluded, in other words.
Yes.
Accountants speak a funny language, Stella. But absolutely, thank you so much. All right, guys, have we got any questions for Stella on the first example? We've got about 3 or 4 minutes just to quickly deal with any questions, any uncertainties. Can I have, for those of you who got extra brownie points, who did the calculation beforehand, please indicate in the chat, did you get the same amount as Stella or not? Let's debate it. I don't know, I see your hand was up. Have you got a question for us?
Yeah, sorry. I mean, it's so interesting, this. I just wanted to find out, do I understand, Mervyn, that certain documentation was shared already? I missed that, unfortunately.
No,
So,
that's absolutely fine. I distributed it at about 10 o'clock this morning.
okay.
There were some registrations after that, so those people would not have received it. However, don't panic. I am going to be distributing the scenarios with the answers, with some other documentation at a later stage.
Ah, great, fantastic. Thanks.
Great, no problem. All right, any other questions on scenario 1?
So did no one try to attempt to calculate this? I would be interested to hear if anybody came to the
Cornay
same.
says that she is on the she got the same one as you. Tracy Lee says probably easier to keep an excluded asset out of the calculation where the value of the excluded asset has not as yet been determined, i.e. a business. Look, absolutely. I suppose from an accountant's point of view, Stella, there might be a part of you that dies a little bit inside if you leave it out. But the netto effect, Tracy Lee, is exactly the same, whether you add it and then deduct it, or whether you just leave it out. I see we had a hand raised. Let me just see. Have I missed someone? Speak now or forever hold your peace. And right, let's go on to scenario number 2. Let me just get our window sort. Oh, someone speaking?
I'm sorry, I think, Steph, did you have a question?
Just unmute yourself, please, Steph. How are you doing? You well?
I'm very well, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you and we can see you.
Great, thank you. So a quick question. If a spouse gives a donation to another spouse for, it's designated as a startup donation for, let's say husband gives 10,000 Rand as a startup fee donation to the wife to get her business off the ground. There is a document that is written and signed between the parties that it is a donation. Does that have any place in this situation?
Okay. There are two aspects there. Remember the definition of a donation, you can't really have strings attached, but let's assume for the time being that it is a donation between the spouses. What you then need to look at, Steph, is section 5.2 of the Matrimonial Property Act says, in the determination of the accrual of the estate of a spouse, a donation between spouses other than a donation mortis causa, i.e. someone has passed away, is not taken into account as part of either the estate of the donor, obviously because the money has gone out of their estate, it won't be there anymore, or as part of the donee. So that 10 million that is lying there, if you look at our example here, we've got the donation of 800,000, which was donated to Jill by John. That would be excluded from the accrual. So you'll see on Stella's example over here under Jill, she's got the 800,000 donation from the spouse is excluded. There is an interesting lacuna in the law, folks. Section 5.1 talks about an inheritance, a legacy, or a donation, and it excludes the donation itself and any subsequent one. Section 5.2, however, doesn't exclude the subsequent assets specifically. It leaves it open a little bit to interpretation. So is only the donation of 800,000 Rand excluded? Is the asset that was purchased with the 800,000 Rand also excluded? Interesting if one looks at the legislation, and we would have to look into case law in terms of that answer. Stella, anything to add in terms of donations between spouses?
No, I think you're absolutely on point there. So for instance, I had the other day a mediation case where we were doing the split of the assets and liabilities, and the husband wanted to include the wedding ring as, because it was quite substantial, as you know, part of her assets. And I said to them, wasn't that a gift that you actually gave to your wife when you got married? And he said yes. And so with that, he was happy to exclude it. Yeah, so there can be many scenarios of you know, assets or donations between spouses.
Right, cool. Steph, answer your question. Happy to go on? Fantastic.
Yes, thank you.
Lovely. Right. Let's go on to scenario 2. Now, scenario 2, it gets a little bit hairy because here we get to do with commencement values. John and Jill are married subject to the accrual on 10 May 2015. Their commencement values are John 100,000, Jill 270,000. There are no exclusions in terms of the ANC. They get divorced on 18 June 2020. The assets in this specific example are, I think, pretty much exactly the same as the previous scenario. And let's see how much the commencement values change things for these parties. So what Stella has done is she's color-coded them. Scenario 2 is our yellow scenario. So Stella, if you would like to take us through it, please.
Thank you, Mervyn. Okay, so let's just start again the overall picture here. So the principle of the calculation of the accrual is exactly the same as the previous scenario. The only difference that we've got in here is the you'll see just above the accrual amount, there's a commencement assets that's being deducted. On John's side, you'll see 132,000. And for Jill, 357,000. That is deducted. So again, just to run it quickly, we take for the combined accrual, it's the 4.8 million of John plus the 1 million of Jill gives us a combined accrual of 5.9 million. You take the 5.9 and you divide it by 2, and that's the amount that each person must have at the end of the day. So John in this scenario has got at the moment 4.8. He needs to have 2.9. Hence, he's going to give Jill an amount of 1.892. And on Jill's side, she's going to receive 1.8 plus her current 1 million is going to make her final accrual the same as John of 2.983 million. Okay, so let's go into the details. Next page, please.
Fantastic. Stella, just in terms of for the attorneys amongst us who are huge sticklers for wording, where Stella talks about commencement assets, we're talking about the commencement value, which has been set out in the antenuptial contract. So let's just see it for what it is. It is the commencement value. So let's go to our summary. So Stella, over to you.
Thank you for that, Mervyn. You see, we all learn every day. So
the beauty is we all speak different languages, Stella. You know, as attorneys don't understand the double entry method in terms of accountants. So, you know, accountants are not necessarily sticklers for wording. You know, I have a client who's an accountant who spoke about a donation to his wife in terms of a loan, and they wrote off, and we had a huge argument at that stage because how can it be a donation? No money has changed hands, and meanwhile it was just a write-off for SARS, which they called a donation. So you accountants do talk funny, but I know attorneys talk even funnier, so don't worry.
Absolutely, not a problem. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly run through it because the crux of this calculation in scenario 2 is actually with the commencement value, which we'll look at now. But let's just see the assets, liabilities, and the assets excluded is exactly the same as the previous scenario. So we can just scroll down that. And the same for Jill. The assets liabilities are the same. Okay, so the problem comes with the commencement value. At least, yes, on this one, I got it right at the top as commencement value and not an asset. Okay, so the date of the marriage was the 10th of May 2015. The date of the divorce is the 18th of June 2020. So here we've got two columns. One of the commencement value for John was 100,000 and for Jill 270,000. So the whole purpose of this is they got married 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, the value of whatever, whether it was cash or an asset, it would be totally different from what that same asset is 5 years later. In terms of money, money loses their value. So in 2015, if something cost him 100,000, it's going to cost a lot more 5 years later. And it's to establish what is that value at the end of their divorce compared to what the original commencement value was. Okay, so going into the calculation, we first look at how many months in the year were they married in 2015. So they got married on the 10th of May. So that means they were, for more than half a month, they were married in May. They got married on the 10th, and May has got 31 days. So it's more than half of the month. So we include May as in our calculation. So from May till December is 8 months. And the reason why we work it in years is because we look at the CPI values per year. Yeah, so there is just a snapshot of the CPI numbers that you can download from Stats SA. It goes back to 2 million years ago, so you can get really old stats in. Just another tip for you guys, when you go to that website, there is a table B1 and a table B2. The table B2 needs to be used for the calculation, not B1. Okay, so we, if you look, just quickly, sorry, before you go back, Mervyn, so it's from January to December, the CPI numbers for each month, and then at the end, it's got the average. So when there was a portion of the year, that's why we established the number of months that they were married, so that we don't use the average for the whole year. We only look at those specific months. And guys, I know this can be very daunting to you guys. And when you attempt it the first time and you get stuck, give me a shout. Okay, so let's go back to the previous page, Mervyn. Okay, so the number of months that they were married, when they got married, till the end of that year for 2015 was from May to December, and that's 8 months. The number of, the next one is the number of months that they were married while they were divorced, in the year that they got divorced, is 6 months. And the reason for that is they got divorced on the 18th of June. So it's more than half of the month of June. So we count June in as well. Hence, from January to June, we've got 6 months. Okay, then the next block is the average inflation rates. So the reason why we split it for the first year, 2015, it was 8 months. So you only use the average for 8 months from May to December. The average CPI as per that other schedule, you take the average for those months, and it will be the 4.78. The other months from 2016 to 2019 is for the full year that they were divorced. So you just take the average as on the schedule. And then the last one, average inflation for 2020, is then from January to June for 6 months. There you take the first 6 months CPI percentages and you take an average of that, and that brings you to the 3.42%. Okay, so that is just to establish what inflation rates we must use. The second part of the calculation is we then take the capital amount and plus the inflation for that year. So for 2015, just go up a bit, Mervyn. The original amount was 100,000. So we start with 100,000. At the end of 2015, that value of the 100,000, if you take inflation in consideration, that 100,000 is now going to be 104,780. So the way that you get to the 104, you take 100,000 plus 4.78% will give you the 104,780. And you do exactly the same for Jill on her side. So her 270,000 that she had in the beginning of the marriage is now worth 282,906 Rand at the end of December. So the next line is the capital and the inflation for end of 2016. Remember, this is now for a full year. So to get to the 111,486, you take the 104,780 plus the inflation rate for 2016, which is 6.4%, will give you then the 111,486. I hope I haven't lost anybody yet.
I don't think you've lost us. I must tell you, it's quite entertaining. Steph, you've left your camera on, and to follow your expressions, Stella's going on. I find it funny because I'm sitting here at the same like, huh? But no, Stella, I think I'm realizing that I have oversimplified it all of these years. This is the capital plus the inflation for 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19. It makes so much sense, and I think it's such a sound way to do it. I don't think you've lost anyone. Steph, I'm really just pulling your leg.
Now she switch off her camera.
I know Steph well enough. I know she's not going to be too angry with me.
Okay,
right.
So that is, and then we add up all this capital plus inflation amounts from the 104,000. If you add, no, sorry, wrong, discard that. You don't add it. You take the total amount at the end of June 2020, which is 132,000. And that is the current value of the original commencement value, taking inflation into account. So John's original amount of 100,000 has grown to 132,000 by the time that they get divorced, and Jill's amount of originally 270 is now 357,000. So I've just put in a check there. I always do that, and that is maybe a tip for you guys as well. When you do these calculations, you'll see on the first screen there's also a check. It should be 0. Always have a double check to make sure that your amounts balances. So just here, so I wanted to check that the growth on both sides should be the same. And if you take the 132,000 minus the 100,000, the original amount, there was a growth of 32,000, and there was a growth of 87,000 for Jill. So if you take the growth and you work out the percentage, it works out exactly 32% on both sides. So guys, it sounds very high, but just think of in reality. You know, we've got, if you look at the inflation rates, 6% in 2016, 5.3% in 2017, down to 3.42%. And you think, okay, the inflation rate is not so high, but why is our prices so high? food, everything has gone up, and it's because of this cumulative effect of the inflation. Hence, we get to an actual growth of 32%. Okay. And then, yeah, so the last slide was just that the table of the CPI. So we can go back and to the first summary. So there you see that 132,000 that we deducted as the commencement value for John, and then 357,000 as the commencement value for Jill. And that is scenario 2.
Awesome. Steph, I feel really bad for picking on you now. You really didn't look as stressed. I was just teasing, but I know you're going to get me back, and I really hope you do. So, guys, yeah, look, obviously when it comes to escalations, having a look at this while Stella is explaining it can look very, very daunting. My suggestion is when we distribute the scenarios now again with the answer, sit down and do it. Play with it. We've put Stella's details on every page for a reason. Why? Because she is a sucker for punishment, and she's indicated that she is happy to receive emails and or calls to assist you if you get stuck. So please do blow up Stella's telephone with any queries that you may have. Let's quickly see, by raise hand function, have we got any questions based on scenario 2? And can I ask anyone who's brave enough, who was brave enough to do this question, have they got it? Oh, excellent. We've got some mediators chiming in all the way from the lovely North Coast. Joe Duplessis, how are you doing today?
Hello, Mervyn. Hello.
Nicer in Ballito than in Joburg, I'm assuming, hey?
Yeah, I'm actually in Hermanus today.
Oh, lovely. Even better. Even better. What's your question, Joe?
Beautiful. Stella, thanks so much for that. That makes it's beautifully set out. When I've done accrual calculations in the past, and how wrong was this? Because I sent people off with it. I used to take the commencement value and times it by the month that we were in, because mostly when we're mediating divorce, of course, we don't have the date of divorce yet.
Yeah.
Just use the month we're in. So I would use the average CPI for that month, according to a table from Statistics SA, divided by the CPI in the month that they were married. So it's more, I suppose it's more averaged.
You know, that's funnily, Joe, and I'm so glad that you are willing to put yourself out there and say, I've made this faux pas, because this is exactly what I've done myself as well. You know, if we look at the provisions of the NPA, if we look at section 4.1 Roman numeral 3, the net value of that estate at the commencement of the marriage is calculated with due allowance for any difference which may exist in the value of money at the commencement and dissolution of the marriage, and for that purpose the weighted average of the CPI as published serves as prima facie proof of any change in the value of money. So look, realistically, Joe, I think you're going to be in the ballpark. It's going to have to be a hell of a big estate for you to be very, very far out. But obviously, I mean, if we really take it laser pinpoint accurately, then Stella's way is the way to go. So thank you for raising that. I really, really appreciate it. Did you have a question with that?
No,
just a comment?
Yeah, I kind of hope I didn't go too far wrong, but I've used the weighted average. And then just, yeah, if you do it so I would do it in the month that we are mediating. But if the divorce takes another 6 months, obviously they need to redo that calculation then. Am I right?
Yes. But you know, Joe, it's not going to make that material difference. It's going to differ, but depending on the value, if we talk millions, it's going to be a material effect. If the smaller the value, the less the difference is going to be. And you know, the inflation rate in 6 months is not really going to make that big a change. But if you look at 2 or 3 years, yes, then it becomes a different number.
Absolutely. You know, I think it's akin to the whole argument of going to maintenance court and arguing about the price of bread. You know,
Yes.
one gets to a point where you have to also be realistic. In mediation, there is no date of divorce yet. So if the parties can accept a D-Day, then you know no one's going to really castigate them big time. Corneille, all the way from Pretoria Oos, how are you doing?
Not that far away, just Centurion. Hi,
Centurion.
Stella.
Last time I said
Corneille.
Centurion and you said Pretoria East. So now I'm saying Pretoria East. I think you're just trying to catch me out, Corneille.
Nice to see
Well,
you,
I
Corneille.
did.
Either way, you're on the wrong side of the Yixke. Move down to the promised land in Joburg.
Whatever.
Whatever.
Okay.
Welcome. Yes, Accrual.
I just want to find out, how do you manage it when there's been commencement money before they got married, but when you work out the accrual, that money's been used. There's the accrual is not even close to what they claimed there was before. Can you still work out that accrual? Because to me that money is gone. And I'm not sure if I'm making sense, Dana.
No, look, it's a very interesting question. So, obviously, you know, in terms of the determination of the commencement value, you know, one has to look at Section 6 of the MPA, and really you look at what the parties said. Now, you cannot have a negative accrual, Corneille. If you said that you are worth 100,000 and you were worth 100,000, but at the end of the marriage you're worth 50,000, you're not going to be worth negative 50,000. Your accrual is going to be nil because there was no growth. Notable exceptions to that is obviously an excluded asset, where let's say you had 100 Rand in an account and you excluded it for purposes of the accrual and you moved it to another account, or you bought 100 Rand's worth of shares and those shares are now worth 100 million. The 100 million would still remain excluded. What I would suggest, if it's okay with you, if I'm not getting to the crux and the nub of your question, can I suggest that you just reach out to Stella directly or to me directly, and then we can just debate it for time's sake? Fantastic, fantastic. Any other questions, folks, before we go into the last scenario?
Before anyone asks a question, I just want to also make another comment, Mervyn. When you talked about the dates,
Yes.
I also wanted to maybe give a tip. When you do the assets and liabilities and people need to supply you with statements, please ensure that all the assets and liabilities are counted at the same date. For instance, don't take the bond account for January and you use your credit card statement for June. You know,
compare apples with apples.
Yeah, agree with the parties on a specific date. This is the cutoff date. This is the values that we're going to use on that date. Yeah. And
Very,
then
very
just
practical suggestion, Stella. Thank you.
yeah, and then just another thing, if there is, I don't know if you've mentioned it, Mervyn, if in the ANC there's no commencement value indicated, then we assume it's zero. Then there's nothing to calculate.
Absolutely. Absolutely spot on. Eloise asks, Mervyn, under scenario 2, why is John's 900K inheritance excluded? I'm asking because I usually exclude inheritances in the ANC. Spot on, Eloise. I think in most ANCs, you will exclude inheritances. However, if you have a look at Section 5.1 of the Matrimonial Property Act, ex lege, an inheritance is excluded. And it reads as follows: an inheritance, a legacy, or a donation which accrues to a spouse during the subsistence of the marriage, as well as any other asset which they acquired by virtue of their possession of the former possession of such inheritance, legacy, or donation, does not form part of the accrual of their estate, except insofar as the spouses may agree otherwise in their antenuptial contract, or insofar as the testator or donor may stipulate otherwise. So the default position, obviously you can stipulate otherwise in the ANC or in the deed of donation or the will, but the default position is that it is excluded. Don't let this one catch you out, folks. In an in-community of property estate, the same does not necessarily apply. So then you have to go and look at the will, whether the testator or the testatrix actually excluded it specifically. Let's go to scenario number 3. Now, scenario number 3 is an interesting one, because scenario number 3, we've got some exclusions as well. So we're not going to go through a calculation of stipulating the commencement value. There's no commencement value here in the ANC. Stella has correctly indicated to you folks that if there is no commencement value, then you use null. And then in terms of that, you can have a look at section 6, 2, and 3 of the MPA in terms of the proof of commencement value of the estate. So we're going to start with a null commencement value. However, here we have a very, very interesting scenario, and that is the scenario of excluded assets. John excludes shares in his business, John's Salon Pty Limited, and Jill excludes her Sanlam retirement annuity. Now, very, very important. John now has 1.7 bars worth of Naspers shares, which he bought with the proceeds of sale of his shares in John's Salon Pty Limited. 1.7 bar is a hell of a reason for parties to fight, either in litigation or in mediation. So we're going to look at that. And then also Jill has her Sanlam retirement annuity, which is now worth 12 bar. Hell of a big thing to fight about in a divorce. So Stella, can I hand over to you? Shall we do the calculation?
Yes, absolutely. Mervyn? Okay, so on this calculation, we've got it, the principle is again the same. So just to run through it quickly again, at the end of the day, John has got an accrual of 3.3 million and Jill has got an accrual of 448, which gives you a combined accrual of 3.756. If you divide the two, you come to an 1.878 million for each. And again, John must pay a 1.43 million to Jill, so that her 1.43 plus a 448 gives her the same accrual at the end of the divorce of 1.878 as what John would have. Okay, so if we go on to the next slide, so the difference, so in the ANC, it was stated that John had a business, John's Salon. The value was not stated there, so there's no commencement value. However, later on, during the marriage, John sold these shares in that business, and he used that money to buy shares in Naspers. Now, if we go to the next slide, Mervyn. So previously, in our other scenarios, the 1.7 million was included in the assets. We now move that asset from asset included to excluded. You'll see in the middle of the page, number 2 under B2, shares in Naspers have now moved to excluded assets. And the reason is because Mervyn will maybe have a better explanation. The fruits of the tree is being used. The tree was the original business shares that he had in John's salon, and he sold it and he bought something else. So because he's bought another asset with the original asset that was excluded, that new asset is also excluded from the joint estate.
Stella, you're absolutely spot on, except for the usage of joint estate. Ek gaan jou gat skop. There is no joint estate. It's out of community, my sister. I'm just joking with you. I'm just joking. You're spot on in saying that NASPASH is going to be excluded as well. And I'll tell you why. Because Section 4(1)(b) Roman numeral 2 of the MPA says so, and it reads as follows: an asset which has been excluded from the accrual system in terms of the ANC of the spouses, as well as any other asset which they acquired by virtue of their possession or former possession of the first mentioned asset, is not taken into account as part of that asset of that estate, at the commencement or the dissolution of the marriage. So you're spot on. There's the legal basis for it. And I can tell you, folks, this is where you're going to have a hell of a lot of fights in litigation and divorces. Remember, our SCA authority says the one who alleges the exclusion must prove the exclusion, and they need to draw the nexus between the first asset and the replacement asset. Over to you, Stella.
Thank you, Mervyn. Okay, so next slide, please. Mervyn, when you said the scenario said 12 million for Sanlam, it's a typo, sorry guys. It's actually supposed to be 1 million, because that will talk to my calculations here. So if we go to Jill, so we'll see Jill's retirement annuity was first in the other scenarios, also again included in the assets. But now, because the same principle, her retirement annuity with Sanlam was excluded as per the ANC, and hence we're moving it from the asset section to the section assets to be excluded. Okay, and then if we look at Jill, as I explained now, that as per the ANC, the retirement annuity with Sanlam was excluded. Hence, we're moving the retirement annuity from the asset portion to the asset excluded. If you look at B3, retirement annuity Sanlam, 1 million excluded as per ANC, and the total assets that's then being excluded is 2.8 million. So if we go back to the top summary, you'll see there is, for Jill, excluded assets of 2.8 million. Okay, so not very difficult, this one, Mervyn. I think the most difficult one was scenario 2, but I think it's just the principle of to realize what is included and what's excluded in the ANC contract. So that would be the starting point before you do these calculations.
Absolutely. And that's why I say, ladies and gentlemen, when you do accrual calcs, have your Matrimonial Property Act open next to you. Section 4, Section 5, and Section 6 is going to be your Bible. Right. Thank you very much to Stella Coetzee, chartered accountant and mediator, for going through this process with us. I really do appreciate your time, Stella. We are going to take 1 or 2 questions, but it is now 2 o'clock on the dot. Your timing, Stella, was like spot on, spot on, spot on. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. I really, really appreciate it. For those who are on the WhatsApp group, please do reach out to Stella there if you've got any other questions. For those who are not on the WhatsApp group yet, please do reach out to me, our ThinkLegal family law group, specifically for family practitioners. Then please keep a lookout. I will also be distributing links. We've got 2 more events this year. We've got my day-long family, Children's Act deep dive, which is SARM accredited, and then I have the parenting plan course, which I'm doing with Adelmarie Vormerans in December. So keep a lookout for those. Stella, any closing comments and advice for people who want to calculate accruals?
No, first of all, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity again, Mervyn, and thank you guys for your time for attending. I think it's just, you know what, we are going to give you a cheat sheet where you can actually give to your clients and say, these are the list of items that could be an asset. Please provide me with that. And then you together with the ANC contract, you can then decide, you know, whether it falls under the asset or liability, and then also, you know, whether it's excluded or not to do the calculation. And also just for completeness sake, you know, to have that list, because we only portrayed a few examples, but there's a whole list of assets and liabilities that could be included that one might not think of, you know, and the clients as well, they might not think about other assets and liabilities. I'm thinking a stupid example, paintings, that's very valuable, or jewelry, you know, stuff like that, but we'll have that list for you. And then just, you know, guys, just get your calculations in a format that you understand. Go through this the exercise and the solutions. If you get stuck, but first try it. You know, you only learn if you do it yourself. Try it yourself. If you get stuck, give me a call and we can chat about it over coffee.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stella. That was absolutely incredible. Folks, as always, my speakers do not get paid for giving of their time. So thank you, Stella. I really do appreciate it. They do it out of the goodness of their own hearts. I would be remiss if I did not recommend Stella to you. Stella does offer some services to attorneys and other mediators even in assisting with maintenance calculations, accrual calculations, as well as FDFs. The attorneys out there, be careful sitting with your client filling in their FDF. If they are wanting to be naughty, you could end up being subpoenaed to come and talk about what happened when you did the FDF with a client. Stella does assist attorneys with that. Stella has indicated that you are welcome to contact her, anybody who's in the webinar today or on the group, if you need any further information or help with everything. Stella is incredibly approachable. So from my side, Stella, thank you for giving of your time, your knowledge, your expertise in this webinar.